My name is Regina Deloria. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The first time I ever heard them, my roommate at the time, I was 7 or 16, I think. He had a bunch of records, and he's the one that introduced me to a bunch of music that I hadn't heard before. He would play Christian Death all the time, and I loved him immediately. Yeah, it's definitely right up my alley.
And what other bands were you into at that point? Like in other words, if I were to ask you before you found Christian Death, what other bands were in like your sphere? What would they be?
I started out with New Wave originally, Duran Duran, all that, but then I moved into punk. Like my first punk record was Dead Kennedys, and then, being into like New Wave, getting into goth, death rock, all that, it's because death rock's, I think a combination of goth and punk, and it just was, I don't know, as soon as I heard it, I was just like, this is for me, this is awesome, I used to listen to mostly I started getting really into Alien Sex Fiends, still one of my favorite bands, love them. Back then I would say like most of the bands I was into probably were kind of like all over the place. Like I said, like everything from like Duran Duran to Dead Kennedys, a lot of like Rudimentary Peni, The Damned, Bad Brains. I was, punk, goth, new wave, death rock. It was mainly what I was into. Try to think of all the bands back then that I would listen to. I still do. Crass, Conflict. I used to listen to a lot of political kind of punk stuff. I like old punk, like Circle Jerks. Stuff like that. And then I really, my friend that introduced me to Christian Death, he was into other stuff that I had not heard before, Dead Can Dance and, things like that too. So, yeah.
And so was there a big community in the area that you grew up in that was into the music? Or, did you have to find people who were kind of like into that? Or were you like the only ones in the area, that kind of thing?
Right. When I first got into punk and new wave, I was 13 and lived outside of Chicago, and there was a ton of punks. And then I moved from there to this little tiny redneck backwards town in Florida, and I was pretty much one of the only like weird kids in my school, so pretty much like everything that I found, there was an alternative radio station at the time, and I used to listen to every single show that they would have. They introduced me to so much music that I didn't know about, didn't have anybody else to help me out, introduce me to, so yeah.
What would you say is the kind of the difference that you would explain to somebody about the difference between mainstream culture and like our culture and how we see the artists and such and the connection?
Right. I definitely, I guess there's always an exception to the rule, where some people think that they're, a huge rock star and they will never come out of their green room and you'll never see them, that there's just no meeting them or talking to them. And, sometimes it's nice to be able to like talk to a band that you've listened to, since you were a kid or whatever. I just feel like our culture is more attainable, definitely. They're generally, like I said, there's always an exception to the rule, but generally don't have that rock star attitude. They're just somebody that started a band, that music that they liked, and they went with it. Some made it bigger than others, and even the ones that make it, they know where they came from, and they know that the scene that they're from they're not generally like MTV.
When you originally saw the post about being in the music video, what were you thinking? Like, what thoughts did it spark for you?
Knowing what the song is about, and the subject matter. I think that most people have somebody close to them that's committed suicide or tried to commit suicide, and or has dealt with like major depression, and people have, we've lost friends. I think that, it's important, like it's a really important subject matter, and I don't know, loving the band itself and then knowing like that it's such an important subject. I don't know, I immediately wanted to be a part of it if I could, I don't know, it just means a lot to me. I've lost people, through the years, and, I can, relate in some ways, to the subject.
Right. So while we were shooting and kind of leading up to it, you had mentioned the idea that writing this kind of like, wow, man, I have to think about this kind of stuff again. Like, could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I was growing up, I would say a lot more when I was like when I was a teenager. I went through a serious bout of depression for sure, where I had, like I was very like negative thoughts, I wasn't to the point of suicide, but I could definitely relate. So like when you're not in such a bad place anymore, it's kind of hard. Like I had a really hard time like writing my note, I had to really dig back to those feelings, it's kind of tough, sit there and like think about really awful things, that went through my brain, God, so long ago when I was a teenager, that's well over 20, 30 almost years ago, you know what I mean? Like that's a long time ago to like reflect back and think of where I was at that point, So yeah, it was really tough, it really was.
When you were going through these stages, did you see like what you would be 20 years later?
No, I totally had that mentality where I didn't think I'd live past, 21. You know what I mean? I just thought like one of those like live fast, die young, kind of things, just like I didn't really think about future that I would ever have one. I never thought I would have a kid, that's for sure. But it's funny to like be where I'm at now and like reflect back and just be like, God, things are so much different, than I thought that they would be when I was this age. I didn't even think I'd be this age ever, but now to be here and have a daughter that's like almost 20, you know what I mean? Like it's crazy. Like I never would have ever imagined that, especially in the headspace that I was in, during some of those dark times. So, yeah.
Right. And it seems like obviously you've raised a well-adjusted daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that she grew up better for the wear because of what you dealt with in your own life? Like, did you have, like, what kind of relationship did you have with your parents?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I had a really good relationship with my mother growing up, but a very different one than the one that my daughter and I have, because whole nother story, but like I grew up in a religious cult, there was a lot of religious aspects to my upbringing, really messed up way, some crazy things. So like, I think dealing with like, a pretty open mother, but living in the environment that I lived in with that like cult that I grew up in is so different, because like, I raised my daughter like to believe whatever she wants to believe. Like I've never pushed anything on her, like I had pushed on me. So if she wanted to go to church and be a good little Catholic girl or whatever, like she can do whatever she wants to do. Like, I just tell her facts, I raised her the way that I thought was right, been very open and honest with her, and let her make her own decisions, I've never ever made her do anything. Never made her go to church or anything, like, or whatever the case may be. We don't eat meat, She has a choice. If she wanted to, she can, I would never ever push that on her, So we've had a very open, honest relationship, It's the way that I think it should be.